Okay, now let everyone in. Okay, Mike, you're all set to go.
Hey, good morning. Welcome. I'd like to call the meeting of the Policy and Personnel Committee to order. It is 9:16 a.m. on October 6th. Stephanie, can you please take attendance?
Of course. Mike Saltis,
Present.
Britt Marie Cole Johnson has not joined us. Holly Williams,
Present.
Ava Bermuda Zimmerman,
Present.
and it looks like Ellen McKitterick has not joined us, but we do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to welcome members of the public and thank them for joining us this morning. The first item is I'd like to ask the committee for a review of the August 2nd, 2022 meeting minutes and a motion to approve. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
I have one quick question. If I second, can I abstain? Since I wasn't at the last meeting? Okay, so I'll second Holly Williams.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Just myself, Holly Williams, because I wasn't present at the last meeting. Thank you.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, to accommodate a scheduling issue, I would like to reorder the agenda to move items 5 and 6 ahead of 3 and 4. So essentially, we would address items 5 and 6 next. In order to do that, we need a motion to approve that reordering of the agenda. May I have such a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. So we will now address items number 5 and 6. And Andrea, please address the two topics, the organizational chart and the board members' orientation. Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you for voting to move. I'm actually making a presentation to a class of new nonprofit leaders this morning about paid leave at 10, so I appreciate that. Let me share my screen. Get this going. And all right. So what I was hoping to do this morning is just to give the committee just a very brief view of what our organization looks like now. I know that you probably get a lot of emails from people and there's lots of activity that you see going on, but it's been quite some time we realize that we've actually shown you what the structure of the organization looks like. So this is where we are. We have 33 people. I think we'll have 34, 35 in a few weeks. The IT director will be growing her part of the organization a bit as we redesign the website and do more to support the collection of uncollected contributions from employers and overpayments of benefits from claimants. So that's going to take some more work. And as you can see, we still have the 5 critical areas of support: the IT director, our finance, our business systems manager. We're actually going to change it. This is all claim support. So a lot of these names may change over time. We have our outreach and engagement, which is managed by our chief marketing communications officer. And then because we do a fair amount of legislative work, and she also supports a lot of the outreach and engagement efforts, we have our senior advisor and chief of governmental affairs, and that is Jacqueline Kozin. So this is where we are right now. Obviously, we have Erin, who serves as our general counsel and our CO, and Michael, who is the associate. We have Amber, and Amber is supported by Stephanie. So I wanted to share this because it's been quite some time since we've done that, and ask if anyone has any questions.
Okay, hearing no questions.
Okay.
Do you want to give us an update on board member orientation?
Sure. So we provided an orientation to our newest board members last week. It was a general overview of how we are organized, where our resources come from, and what board responsibilities are. We also spoke about FOIA and board member responsibilities, fiduciary responsibilities, and the like. It took about an hour, maybe a little bit less than that, maybe about 45 minutes, but I think the board members who attended found it to be very valuable. We will be offering it again to another set of newer board members, not as new as the ones who joined us, but there are some who joined who haven't had the benefit of having a formal orientation. So we'll be doing that again when at a date that's mutually convenient, or more specifically, more convenient for those board members that couldn't make the first date that we offered. And if there is any other board member that doesn't necessarily need a basics orientation, but would like a deeper dive into some of the other things that we're doing, we are always happy to put together a presentation, where we can talk about those things. As long as, we have enough time and we understand what the topic is, we can work through that with board members and in different areas. So that's what I wanted to share.
Okay.
Right. I'm also, yep, that's it.
Any questions or comments on board member orientation?
I would just say, having gone through it, even knowing all the background and everything, I found it very helpful, even just to remind us of things that we probably thought we already knew. But so anybody who hasn't had a chance to attend, it was very informative.
Thank you, Holly.
By any chance, was that recorded?
We did not record it, but we're happy to repeat it. We didn't think to record it at the time. We really didn't. We spent a lot of time preparing it. I think all of us didn't really think about recording it. But we're happy to hold it again. I think the second one that we hold with the other board members, we can certainly record because it will be the same material.
Yeah, I think following up on Holly's comment, it would be helpful for those who have been on the board for a while, and in the beginning there was no formal orientation, to have the opportunity to review it. Thank
Sure, we'd be happy to do that.
you. Okay, any other questions or comments on board orientation? Okay, thank you, Andrea.
All right, thank
Good luck
you.
with your presentation.
Thank you. All right, off I go. Thanks, everyone.
We will now pick up with item number 3 on the agenda. Aaron, would you please provide us with an update on the private plan audit process?
Certainly. Stephanie or Amber, could you allow me to share my screen? So while that is happening, I'll tell you that we have been, we spent the first part of the year drafting the audit guide, and then we solicited volunteers to basically beta test for us, which has been incredibly helpful. Sorry, let me get to the right screen. Nope, that's not it. There we go. The beta testing has been incredibly helpful. We've been doing it in real time, really originally to test the feasibility of the timeframes, but also, just like any good rehearsal, as we go through it, we identify issues that we hadn't thought of before. That's enabled us to amend and revise the guide. So we really appreciate the employer who volunteered to be our tester, and we are working through the final stages. One of the things we realized is just as in when we do a claim and we get documentation that may be incomplete or insufficient, we need to build in time to ask for clarification. We realized as we review the files, we had questions, so we're building in time to meet with them again to ask some questions that came up before we do our draft report. So as we work through that, we anticipate finishing up within the next few weeks, I think. We are also working with our IT team to identify a solution for getting those files. Right now, we've because it's a beta test and it's just one, we've been able to do it kind of through email, but that's not a long-term solution. So we're identifying solutions that will enable us to identify the documents that are needed, have the entities that are being audited produce those documents to us for our review in a secure way. And then when the audit is complete, we can basically capture any documentation that we need to substantiate any findings. But other than that, everything else goes away. This is something that we've worked out with the state library as being consistent with the state records retention. And it just is both a more secure way of handling an audit. It's more consistent with the way regular audits are always done. And it makes sure that we're not dealing with just IT issues of file size and things like that. Our big request to the committee today is we wanted to share with you the audit guide. So you've all seen that. The way we've drafted the audit guide is to have that basically be the policy document. So if you had a chance to review it, you saw we kind of had an introductory statement that explains how it's drafted, how we have sort of an explanation, and then there's sort of things that are bracketed that can be modified sort of as we go. But we wanted to make sure you were okay with that approach rather than having us do kind of the traditional policies that we do with our traditional citation format, where we would simply explain what we would be doing in the guide. We thought the guide itself is probably more useful, but we wanted to make sure you were okay with that approach. So the alternative would be basically creating a more formal policy that says something along the lines of kind of the authority shall create a guide, and the guide shall list all of these things and explain all of these pieces, all the things that the guide does.
Okay, any questions or comments on the private plan audit guide?
I guess the big question is, does anyone have any concerns about our approach of using the guide as the policy document itself?
Aaron, is there any legal significance to using the plan as the audit guide as opposed to going the other direction that you had mentioned?
We haven't identified any. The reason we went this route is because we thought it provided more clarity and greater transparency as to the approach. And so we thought that was a good thing. Even though we're not using sort of the citation standards we've developed for our other policies, I think if anyone were to challenge the guide, it is still possible because it's divided into sections. Other state agencies have policy manuals and guides and things like that that don't look like regulations. So we're not, on uncharted waters here. It's just sort of new for us.
But theoretically, just to follow up on where maybe I think you're going, or maybe you're not, but theoretically, if somebody wanted additional information, they could request it. I mean, it's not like they're precluded from digging in deeper if they needed to, just like any other state resources, right?
Right. It's really, it really is a question of the form as opposed to the substance of how we want to do it. It's just, if the way we developed it, we wanted to, it illustrates how we do the audit, and it identifies the documents and issues that we will address in every audit, as opposed to sort of a traditional policy document that would sort of direct us to, the authority shall identify the documents. The authority shall look at the following things. It's just, our checklist looks like a checklist as opposed to a series of bullets. I really do think it is form over substance, but it is, we didn't want to spring it on you sort of at the last minute.
Well, it sounds like form over substance. And if there's no substantive difference between this approach versus the other approach you mentioned, I'm comfortable with going forward with the current approach. Do you need a motion and a vote on this? No.
No, this was really a temperature check. We're not, because we keep finding things that we want to revise as we go through the beta test, we're not quite done with it. We think there may be some revisions. So we will be bringing it back to you and then the full board probably in November, hopefully, for sort of the approval to post and get public comment and all of that. As I said, we just wanted to do a temperature check. If this was like, no, this looks weird, we don't like it, rewrite it. We wanted to know that now instead of in November.
It sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just add in this space that I think that as a general statement, the way that you communicate outward anything, even policies that you post for public comment, are very accessible. And I think that that's a good trend to kind of stay on. I think it's a good way for state government to be. So I think that, yeah, I'm supportive of trying to be mindful of how we're communicating various materials and things like that. So I would be supportive.
Okay, Aaron, I have one question that perhaps that doesn't go to the issue of which form to use, but if in the course, there seems to be a trend generally for government agencies to share information that they learn in the course of an investigation. And if the authority were to do an audit and learn that the employer is in violation of something else, do we have authority to share that information with the appropriate state agency?
So, you know what I'm going to say, because it's what lawyers always say, which is it depends. Certainly for the audit report itself, we anticipate sort of using the checklists that are in the guide. And if they met the report, if they met the check, check, that's good. If there's a finding, we would explain the finding. We're not going to get into sort of a very discursive and we don't want to write novels about that. But if we were to discover in the course of an audit that there was some sort of wrongdoing, for example, we would have to make a determination as to sort of whether it's in our jurisdiction to address directly, whether it is in some other agency's jurisdiction. Obviously, sort of easy example is, we learned that there's some sort of, somebody inadvertently shares with us documentation that shows that they're stealing from their employees. We would have to report that to the appropriate law enforcement entity. But our job is not to just be roving reporters looking around to see if there's something happening. We're really trying to stay very focused with these audits. So we're not going to go,
Right.
wandering around saying, well, we think you should do a better job of X, Y, and Z. We don't like the way you described this. That's not our job.
Okay, and I was thinking in particular about, we find that the employer's not paying the employee properly. Maybe it's a tipped employee and they're not handling it properly, would we refer that to the Department of Labor? And it sounds like the answer is it's on a case-by-case basis.
I think it has to be. Particularly, one of the things that we've tried to do with the audit is to really be strategic about what we ask for, because we don't want to overburden employers when we audit them. And we are a tiny little team and we don't have a lot. So we don't ask for a lot of information that I think would give rise to kind of things that are outside of our scope. But if we were to discover it, we would have to make a determination and seek counsel.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comments about the private plan audit process? No, okay, Aaron, so I think you have our temperature on this. To go
Thank you. I
forward with
appreciate the temperature check.
Okay, let's move to the next item. Aaron, can you please provide us with an update on the policies that have been posted for public comment?
Sure. So in August, we posted three policy documents for public comment. We received comments back on the private plan transitions. So I'm going to talk about those first. Because the comments really did cause us to revisit our approach to the private plan transition. Just as a kind of level set, when we talk about private plan transitions, we're talking about employers that are in the public plan that choose to go to a private plan, employers that have a private plan that choose to terminate their private plan and come into the public program, or employer has a private plan with one carrier and chooses to move to another carrier, or self-insured, so private to private. Our goals for the policy in general were to make sure that the burden on claimants is as minimal as possible, particularly when we're talking about in-flight claims, which I'll talk about in a moment. We want to minimize the administrative complexity of the transition, because they can be incredibly complex and difficult, and the more complicated, the harder it is to do, harder it is to make sure it's consistent, harder it is to enforce with other parties. We wanted to make sure that whatever policies we have are workable for all types of claims, particularly intermittent leaves, because intermittent leaves can be very tricky, and I'll talk about that in a second. And by statute, private plans have to provide equal or better benefits as our program to the employees. So we need to make sure that whatever rules we have for ourselves, we want to make sure that private plans are kind of held to those same standards. And there's nothing particularly simplistic about any of these private plan transition goals, but we want them to be relatively easy to understand and explain, so that claimants understand what's happening, employers understand what's happening. Again, the easier it is to explain, easier it is to understand, the more likely it is that people will do it correctly. And people will have, particularly employees, will know what to expect. So those are our overarching goals. The reason that we want to kind of take a step back really relates to two concepts. The first is, do we require a run out versus a takeover? And the second relates to the benefits the employees get. When we talk about takeover, we mean that as of the date of the transition, the old plan is no longer responsible for any claims, and the new plan takes over all the old claims. That is the approach that you saw in published policy proposal, too many P's. We have been asked to reconsider that approach and to consider a run out approach. The run out means that the old plan would continue to administer any claims that are in effect, while sort of these in-flight claims. So if I have a 10-week claim that begins in November and my private plan switches over in January, my old plan would continue to administer my claim for the remainder of the 10 weeks, instead of making me apply with the new plan for those last 2 weeks. The run out approach is something that is typically done with short-term disability in the short-term disabilities industry in that space. It does make life easier for claimants because you don't have to refile, but it does add some complexity. And one thing, even though we want consistency, we know that if we involuntarily terminate a plan for cause, we think that that requires a separate treatment because we don't want to force somebody to stay with a plan that we think has done something wrong that justifies a termination. The other issue is the history versus the fresh 12. In this context, the history means that an employee with the new plan's benefit entitlement would be reduced by the amount of benefits they received under that old plan. So in my example, if I've used 10 weeks of my 12 weeks in a 12-month period, by the time the new plan comes around, should the new plan give me 2 weeks or should they give me the fresh 12, which would mean the employee would get a new allotment of 12 weeks with the new plan, just like they'd get if they worked for a new employer. As a agency for the Connecticut Paid Leave Program itself, we have made the decision that if employees are in a private plan and come to us, they will get a fresh 12. We're not doing a history. We're giving them the fresh 12. So the question is, do we mandate that for carriers and other private plan providers? We previously were going to do the takeover, and we had decided that we would give a fresh 12, but we were letting employers make up their minds as to whether to do the history or the fresh 12. As I mentioned, we've been asked to reconsider that and to provide the runout instead, so that old plans continue to administer any claims that were in effect, because this really provides benefits to the employees. They don't have to file a new claim. They don't run the risk of losing eligibility in the middle of a claim or having their benefits recalculated in the middle of a claim. They can just continue with what their expectations were. The runout does make a lot of sense. And we as staff are sort of in favor of that approach. However, it's complicated by the history versus the fresh 12. When you do the runout, it means that you have an employee who could have one claim under their old plan, most likely an intermittent or continuous leave claim, and they could file a new separate claim under the new plan. And so both claims are in effect for a period of time. Given the complexity associated with that, we think a fresh 12 has to happen, because you can't take a history on a pending in-flight claim unless you require everyone to talk to each other once a week, which, we have over 1,000 intermittent claims right now. Like if we ever had to, communicate with a dozen different carriers about who's on intermittent leave and what leave they took this week, it would be a disaster. It's incredibly complicated. The other thing that complicates the history is private plans are allowed to calculate the 12-month period in any one of 4 ways, which is consistent with federal FMLA. But trying to transition the history and account for a difference in the 12-month period is candidly quite a mess. So we think while a runout is really beneficial to the employees, it's consistent with insurance industry, our recommendation is that it can only be paired with the fresh 12. What we anticipate doing is basically having to rewrite this policy and bring it back to the board for public comment again, because this is a pretty significant change. So we would want to go back out for public comment.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Questions or comments?
Am I allowed to speak since I'm a party crasher?
Yes, you are a guest, so you couldn't vote.
Thank you, Molly, for attending the meeting.
I
Absolutely, you're allowed.
Great. I mean, I think this all makes a lot of sense. And I think particularly if there are circumstances where what is standard and requested by the insurance industry is also what's best for claimants, that feels like a no-brainer. I did want to ask about potential like longer term intermittent claims. So I'm thinking about like somebody who has like an ongoing need for dialysis, where they're not using very much leave at a time, but theoretically that claim could kind of run, it could run through multiple benefit years, right? Like it could go on for a very, very long time. How does that interact with the idea of a run out? Is it sort of like the cap on the run out is the benefit year
Yes.
in that circumstance? Okay.
Yeah, so exactly. And thank you for bringing that up. So because there are folks who need intermittent leave for years on end, and it is the complexity of trying to hold on to a person and a claim for that time is sort of unfathomable. So the run out there would be for the claim year. So, and it would be whatever that claim year is under the old plan.
Mhm.
So at most it would be 11 months and 27 to 30 days after the first date of the intermittent leave.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess my understanding of the recommendation is when the staff rewrites the policy to take back to the board, that it's going to be mandatory on private plans that they do both a run out and a fresh 12. Is that right?
That's what we're thinking right now. We know that the fresh 12 may be a little bit more controversial than the run out because it, employers, and the fresh 12 would, just to be clear, the fresh 12 would only be as to the benefits. It does not provide a fresh 12 for job protection.
Yeah.
So we know that could cause confusion, and employers might be concerned about what appears to be, one employee getting 12 weeks, another employee getting significantly more. But intermittent leaves are so tricky. And, I can tell you that just the experience that I've had with state agencies, with an employee who works for multiple state agencies. So you're talking about one common system and HR professionals who all work together, operating under the same rules, trying to manage intermittent leave for an employee in two agencies, in one time reporting system. We all have access to core. Even with all of those commonalities, it is rife with errors and mistakes and confusion, and trying to do it across separate entities, separate systems. I cannot imagine a way that it would work. And then it's exacerbated by the 12-month period issue.
Got it. That all I think makes perfect sense. And I was just going to ask about CTF and LA consistency. I mean, it sounds like just where we're going to end up is there's going to be people who are entitled to more time than money because of
more money than time.
More money than time. Other way around. More money than time. And like, that's just I think we have to think about that as a communications issue because like legally there's no way to solve that. And I think it's just a question of thinking about how to best communicate something that's going to be confusing, even if it's necessarily confusing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or
I see
comments?
Eva has her hand up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was wondering, so there's that line that says plans that are involuntarily terminate for cause may require separate approach. What's the timeline for adding that separate approach? Like, are you going to come back to us and let us know what that approach may be and those options?
No, I mean, the timeline is in this policy that we have to draft. Again, we're sort of taking your temperature check right now. What we would include it and what we would go back to the board with. But basically the idea would be, the proposal would be require the run out, except if we're involuntarily terminating for cause, in which case, when that happens, the folks who are in that involuntarily terminated plan come to the public program and we would have to do a takeover. Because again, it just sort of feels illogical to say, hey, plan, because it's really hard to terminate involuntarily terminate for cause. Like there's got to be something significant happening. And if we've made that determination that for some reason this employer's plan is so problematic, we'll then say, but hey, employees, you stick with them. We don't like them anymore, but you stick with them, just feels wrong. So
Yeah,
the
it has to
separate
be
approach
triggered.
is-
That has to be triggered. It's not going to be automatic.
yeah, there's a whole due process thing going on there. But so the separate approach is separate from the voluntary term, not separate in terms of timing for the policy.
Whole different question.
Mhm.
Once the plan, so moving forward with run out rather than takeover, since it's leaning that way, how will we communicate that to someone who might be in that scenario? So the policy is there and people can read the different rules, but if someone didn't expect to be in a run out scenario, is there like an automatic letter that's sent to them explaining what's happening?
So I'm going to answer your question, but slightly in a long-winded way, because I can't think of how to make it shorter. What we would like to do would be to try and quickly rewrite the plan, proposed policy for this, get it in front of the board at the board meeting in October, because we'd like to get it publicly noticed and back to the board by December, so that the new policy is in effect before January, because there'll be a whole new tranche of private plans taking effect in January. So we'll kind of expedite this part of it. We anticipate doing a newsletter to private plans this fall, so that all private plans get more of a plain language explanation. And then certainly for situations where we have folks who are currently in our public program who are going to private plan, we can do some communication to the affected employees. And we can, I think, create some template language to share for private plans. So we'll have to kind of think about making sure that that communication gets out there. I think it's a better message than right now, which is, hey, your employer switched to a private plan. Your claim with us is ending and you need to refile, which is what we've been doing for the last 6 months. So I think we can work on the communication, but I think it's going to be an easier message.
Okay.
Aaron, so I have a question and an observation. Number one, I want to thank those who submitted public comments that prompted you and us to revisit this, because I think the sense is the inclination is that run out seems to make more sense. My question is why the run out is inextricably linked to the fresh 12. And here's why. Here's my question, or the concept. If the run out is the private plan has to, and I'm focused on intermittent leave.
Mm-hmm.
If the private plan has to administer intermittent leave through the end of the benefit year, Molly's example with the dialysis, what am I missing? Why is there any need to share information between how much leave, intermittent leave the individual is taking?
Thank you for that question, because I wasn't being clear. It becomes an issue if that employee files a separate claim with the new provider. So, which we see a fair amount in the FMLA world. So I have an intermittent leave claim with my old provider. For example, I've got a condition where I'm going to be out. Maybe not dialysis, because you can plan for that, but I have a condition that causes flare-ups. I have flare-ups 1 to 2 times a month, and each time I have a flare-up, it lasts 2 to 3 days. So that's under my old plan. my plan transitions, my own serious health condition is being handled by the old guys. But I now need caregiver leave on an intermittent basis for family member who's got dialysis. I'm not always sure if I'm the one who has to take my family member to the appointment. So for that, it's going to be, you know, one day, 1 to 4 times a month under the new plan. If we're doing history, I only get 12 weeks of benefits in my 12-month period. So we have to count up the amount of absences I took under my old plan and continue to be taking under my old plan, and compare that to the absences I'm taking for my caregiver leave, and try to make sure that doesn't exceed 12. And that is really tricky. It is admittedly not a common thing. It's not like going to be like the top 10 most frequent things, but it happens enough that we have to account for it. And that's why history is hard. You know, the line in this, like the original approach was like the line in the sand. Anything I took before is old.
Mhm.
And I have a date certain.
Mhm.
And so the takeover plus history makes sense, because
Mhm.
anything I took under my old plan is old. Anything I take under my new plan is new. You have a date certain that you can sort of count that, but the takeover has all these other problems in terms of being more difficult for the employee, less consistent with insurance industry, less consistent with their actuarial practices and their underwriting practices. So, you know, I think we're going to get comments when we go back out and say we think they're run out plus fresh 12, but I really do feel like it's takeover plus history or run out plus fresh 12. I don't know how you can mix and match those.
I am curious how the insurance industry with short-term disability probably deals with the same issue.
Short-term disability doesn't have intermittent leave. So what we've been hearing and learning is the short-term disability world does run out because you really don't ever have this intermittent leave issue.
Yeah.
You're out. They don't provide it. Leave management, which deals with these sporadic absences and intermittent leave and stuff, leave management systems often use like that new fresh entitlement role. We're in this weird middle spot.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay. Any further questions or comments on private plan transitions?
Ava, you still have your hand up. Is that old? I'm going to assume it is.
That is old.
Okay.
Okay. Aaron, I think you had some other policies to
do.
discuss.
The others are pretty straightforward. We didn't get any comments on these. Just as a quick reminder, the revisions to the sole prop really related to 3 topics. One was the contribution obligations. We let you enroll sort of at any time. You'd owe for the entire quarter in which you're enrolled. And then on withdrawals, it's really kind of is consistent with practice, because a lot of folks who are sole props enrolled thinking they were required to, and then when they learned they weren't required to, we've let them withdraw. We just wanted to kind of formalize this to say, okay, we're basically going to treat this as though you never did. So we're not going to make you pay your contributions if you're retroed back to the date of enrollment. But of course, if you got any benefits, you have to give those back to us. Like, we'll just kind of go back to 0. On the withdrawals, there are sort of different requirements if you withdraw because you just don't want to participate any longer versus you withdraw because you no longer meet the eligibility, meaning you moved out of state, or maybe you're no longer a sole proprietor. And so we just are formalizing that, yes, we can require proof. But we wanted to make sure we captured a potential avenue for abuse, which is someone who withdraws now because they don't want to pay contributions and then says, oh, but now I want to come back in, like realizes in a quarter that, well, so the concept here is, say you've got a big contract, you got a lot of money, you don't want to make your contributions on that money, but you're like, oh, but what would be really nice would be to have that money go toward my benefits. And so we don't want people playing games with kind of coming in and out of the program to try and game the system. So we want to have a waiting period that says if you chose to enroll and then you chose to withdraw and now you want to come back, you have to wait 4 quarters from either the effective date of the withdrawal or, because we allow retro effective dates, the date of request, again, just to prevent this gaming of the system. And then finally, we just added a little bit more detail regarding the proof of income, because for sole props, we're really looking at tax records, and depending on the time of year, they may not have their tax records, so we have to look at the previous year. Again, we didn't get any comments on that, so we're planning to move forward with those unchanged, those proposed revisions to the board next week without any revisions.
Any questions or comments on the sole proprietorship?
And
Okay,
then
hearing none.
is the holidays and shutdowns. Again, no comments on this. The proposed changes really added examples and illustrations to the policy that had been previously adopted by the board. And just as a reminder, the policy that we've adopted is really consistent with federal FMLA regulations, but people were getting confused. So we wanted to add these examples. And the basic principle is that essentially if you're on a block leave, if a holiday occurs during a week in which you are on leave, the fact that the holiday occurs does not alter your weekly benefit. If the holiday occurs during a week when the employee is working at least part of the week, then you would not get a benefit for the day of the holiday unless you can show us that you would have been working that day. So think about, a hospital worker who works, doesn't matter if it's Christmas, they're working. We would obviously give you your compensation for that day, but this is just the way FMLA works. And then just as a reminder to folks, because they keep forgetting, our benefits are based on the earnings during the base period, not on the earnings that a person would have otherwise earned if they were working this week. So the base period is the first 4 of the 5 most recently completed quarters. It's an average. So people can't come to us and say, hey, I would have worked Christmas and I would have gotten a holiday bonus for working Christmas, so I want my benefits to be increased for that, because that's just not how the statute allows us to calculate benefits. So we just wanted to make that more clear in the policy. And again, no comments on this one.
Okay, any questions or comments on holidays and shutdown policy?
Great.
Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for the discussion. We appreciate it.
Okay, moving, our next agenda item is old business. Is there any old business anyone would like to discuss? Hearing none, we'll move to new business. Is there any new business anyone would like to raise? Hearing none, we'll move to our final agenda item, adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Aye,
Aye.
opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. It is 10:06 a.m. Thank you very much for your time and attention this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.